Welcome to the SRS Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Babyar, and I'm the Training Director of Support Raising Solutions. Whether you're a new ministry worker or a veteran looking to increase your competence and confidence, Support Raising Solutions seeks to bless you in your quest to be a spiritually healthy, vision-driven, fully funded Great Commission worker.
Welcome to the SRS Podcast. This is a different voice than you might be used to. This is Steve Shadrach, and I'm on staff with this ministry, the author of the God Ask, but your normal host, Aaron Babyar, is here with me, and I asked him, could we kind of switch roles today? And Aaron does such an amazing job, I think, of hosting this and the way he interacts with the different guests and the questions he asks. And I just said, well, let me be the host one time and let me kind of interview you. You do such a good job of interviewing others. Let me find out about your life. I know a lot about his life, but I want our listeners to understand more about the life behind the voice.
Well, I'm instantly uncomfortable. But okay.
Well, you are a person that puts everyone at ease, Aaron, and you're so approachable and so enjoyable. And so thank you for your leadership with this podcast and with our ministry and really to the body of Christ. Aaron Babyar is married to a wonderful woman and has a great family and lives in Northwest Arkansas and is the training director for Support Raising Solutions. Yeah. And has been doing monthly boot camps now for 6 years, Aaron? Or?
Yeah, we're knocking on the door of 7 at the time that we're doing this. Yeah.
So every single month he is in some city or now some country, because we've expanded to different countries and different languages. The materials, the training are in different languages. And he's even doing virtual boot camps during the pandemic. That's what he's doing today.
Yeah. So suddenly I'm on a few less plane flights as of late, kind of like everybody else for who knows how long. But we're still doing those monthly boot camps, aren't we?
Well, I got to participate in a boot camp really for the first time, I guess, in 5 years or so myself. Because I'm over at Aaron's office behind his house here, where he upstairs has these amazing computers and screens set up, and there he was along with Micah May and Callie and a few others behind the scenes there. Y'all were, what is today, day 2, I guess, tomorrow's the final day, of a online virtual boot camp.
Yes.
That 60 people or something we're in? Or?
Yeah, we had 60 people currently in the boot camp that we're doing right now. We still far prefer real life boot camps. There's just something about the educational quality. It's just higher. So God willing, at some point we won't need to do online boot camps. Yeah. And I know some people would think, oh, well, it's going to be cheaper if I do it online. Yeah, it's still better real life.
Oh, yeah.
And yet, we are thankful for the technology. Mark Wilson is such a great managing director for Support Raising Solutions, and I'm just so thankful for him.
Yep.
Of course, Jessica Wood, Sue Osborne, Kathy Wilson contributes, and of course, Callie Buchholz. I mean, the team at SRS, I tell you, Steve, I count myself as blessed to work with some really talented people. None of them have a bone in their body that says, well, it's good enough.
Yeah.
They're really
the standard of excellence is pretty significant.
It really is. Nobody's happy with good enough. Everybody wants better. And so to work with them and then also get to lead podcasts with Jeremy Henderson and with Micah May, I count myself a blessed man. I truly do.
That's neat. Well, the purpose, I think, the direction we want to go with this particular podcast, Aaron, is just to get to know you better. And so why don't, just for our listeners, briefly, if you would, just give a tad of your spiritual journey.
Okay.
How you came to Christ and grew in Christ, and what were a few of the milestones there, just so they can kind of hear your story, if you would.
Sure. Well, I was blessed that I grew up in a godly home. I can humbly and profoundly thankfully say that my dad loves Jesus.
Wow.
My mom loves Jesus.
Wow. It's fantastic.
And, I've been cheering up about that just because I've known so many people that can't say that.
That's right.
And I'm so thankful
Yep.
for them and their godly example. My dad was a pastor for a couple of years, And then he was in one of those little churches that just wanted him to feed the sheep that were already there. And he had a passion for the gospel. And he didn't want to just do that. And he wasn't allowed to interact with people that didn't know Jesus, basically. I mean, that's kind of the setup of that church. And so he became a cop instead.
Wow.
So, yeah. So my dad has a Bible degree, but has mostly worked in law enforcement throughout his career. And my mom would lead backyard Bible clubs and Christian women's clubs. And so I grew up in a godly home. But, the reality is I was kind of always around it. But, most people at some point, they have to realize this whole Jesus thing, that's not everybody else's. I have to make a decision. And kind of funny enough, we had a clown that came to our children's service at a church when I was like 5 or 6 years old. And he just kind of did one of those, hey, who here would like to be a follower of Jesus? And I raised my hand. Patches the clown it was, Steve. Patches the clown led me to Jesus. So I have these godly parents, but who led me to Jesus?
Patches the clown.
Patches the clown.
Okay, that's unique.
It explains a lot about me, I think.
That's right.
So yeah, I grew up in a godly home, but Steve, I think probably Jesus became my best friend as an early teenager.
Okay.
And I did have a passion for the gospel. I wish I could say, I led hundreds of my friends to Christ. Everybody was seen just as I am by the time we graduated from high school. I led them all to, I can't.
And what town was this that you graduated?
Indianola, Iowa.
Iowa, okay.
I grew up in Iowa.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of Chicago roots, but I grew up in Iowa. And, but I did grow in my love for Jesus as a teenager. I made a lot of mistakes, like a lot of teenagers do. But I fell in love with Jesus.
Did you go off to college someplace?
And I did. I went to, first year, I kind of went to a JUCO, and I was one of those disinterested students in high school. And then I realized when you do that, not just any college will let you in. Your options are limited.
That's right. Harvard was not offering you a scholarship.
No. They might have let me push a broom, maybe, but they weren't going to let me go to class there. And, between my freshman and sophomore year of college, I had started out with an intention of probably being in the FBI or the DCI or the DEA or something like that. And so I started off with the intent of getting a degree in some sort of like criminology or criminal justice or something like that. Well, I had the opportunity for a couple summers prior to that to work at a Bible camp. And I was so passionate about leading kids to Jesus, but never was the idea of doing vocational ministry. That was never on my radar.
When did that pop in? When did the Lord impress you for that?
Well, I got allowed from an early age, probably 4th grade. Like it was a goal. Like I want to work at the camp because I saw how the counselors could share Jesus with the kids, and I was like, what? I mean, there's not a better job in the world. That guy's getting paid to tell people about Jesus, and he gets to like go swimming and have fun. So as a 4th grader, it was kind of a goal, but I really didn't see beyond, I'm going to be a counselor someday.
Sure.
So I was a counselor at East Iowa Bible Camp for a couple of years, and between my freshman and sophomore year of college, some things worked out where I ended up working at a different camp, Timberley Christian Center in East Troy, Wisconsin, and I just worked there for a summer, and Steve, that was a microwave, so to speak. Like I felt like I was under a lot of pressure because God was dealing with me. And who I was in my character, as well as who he was calling me to be in ministry.
Yes.
And as well as even my passion and love for Marky. And so I was this mixture of maturity and complete immaturity.
Had you already met her at this time?
I had already met her.
Met her, Marky?
I had met. We had sort of dated, but not really. Like
was she at one of the camps, or
what? She was at John Brown University already, but my sister was going to John
Brown in Siloam Springs, Arkansas. So how'd you get from Wisconsin, Iowa down to John Brown?
Well, in this whole time of change and upheaval, and was I working at a camp, or was I going to this college or this degree or whatever else? I had met Marky in my senior year of high school. My parents had said, "Hey, we want to go see your sister's opera down at John Brown University." Yeah, I was not about that. I was a lot more about the Beastie Boys and Run DMC and Biz Markie, those rappers from back in the day. And my parents said, hey, and I'd already had a taste of freedom. My parents had said, hey, we know you're used to like being in charge and working at these camps all summer and kind of living as an adult. And we know you're 18. I was in my senior year of high school. And they said, we're going down to your sister's opera. We're not all together as a family very often. This is the last thing we're ever going to make you do.
Really, the last thing?
If you have a good attitude.
Ooh. Well, that's subjective.
Well, all of a sudden, I was like, let's go to my sister's opera. Because I was like, yeah, I can have my freedom. Well,
Did they end up saying you had a good attitude? That was the last thing?
Children, obey your parents. Because that worked out so well for me. I met the love of my life.
But was that the last time they ever killed you?
That was the last time they ever forced me to do anything. And and it was still another year or so before I ended up going to John Brown, because the other parts of my story I already told.
But you were fired up when you met Marky.
Well, I was in love. I mean, the night I met her, I went home the next day, Steve, and I wrote her a 10-page love letter, and I broke up with my girlfriend back in Iowa. Like I was whooped.
Was she already attending school there?
Oh yeah, over women, man. I was all about that.
Okay,
I got you.
I
was a senior in high school, and a freshman in college talked to me.
Yeah,
she talked to me.
Aspiring to great things.
This beautiful woman that loved Jesus talked to me. Oh yeah, it was great. So anyway, so I'll fast forward back where I was. I was in Wisconsin. This is a year and a half after Marky and I had kind of started dating, but not really. Mostly me, were so immature. And that summer, God just started dealing with me and started showing me, hey, you have gifts, you have abilities, and also you have a calling. What are you going to do with this?
Wow.
And Steve, it switched from, I want to work at camp because I want to tell kids about Jesus, and I want to have fun, and I want to do this, to no, I have a calling. I have a calling to the Great Commission. It's not a hobby anymore. This actually
you were kind of getting the big picture there.
Yeah,
it sounds like
it was turning into a vocational long term, whether I get paid or not. This is what I have to do full time.
Yeah, that's good.
And so instead of going back to junior college, I was a bit of an athlete, so I had some opportunities to potentially play some pro baseball, maybe even some basketball stuff. But instead of that, I had a little bit of a plan to go be a walk-on at University of Arizona on their basketball team. I was looking at that. At one point, I had a tryout set up with Chicago White Sox. Like I was really into sports and all this.
Wow! And
it turned.
Did you end up playing in any basketball for John Brown or no? No,
just intramurals.
Always
just intramurals. Yeah, I was offered a. Well, I tell you what, this is one of those proof in the pudding things. I did transfer to John Brown into their ministry department, and one of the first things that happened is I was offered a spot on the John Brown University Eagles basketball team.
Wow!
But either I did that or I accepted a position working as a youth director.
I thought you said you're either going to accept that or date Marky.
No, that wasn't on the table. I was already whooped on that one. And so I know this sounds kind of silly, but at that point in my life, Steve, that was perhaps one of the toughest decisions I ever made. Was, am I going to be faithful? Am I going to be obedient to what God has called me towards? Which at that point it very much was, you need to get educated. You need to grow.
Yeah.
If you're going to go into the full-time ministry long term, you got some maturing to do. And I had an opportunity to work in a church in the whole 9 yards. Or are you going to pursue basketball? Because in my own pride, really what I liked doing, and this is going to sound terrible, but I was a little 5'11", 6-foot white guy, and I just loved dunking on people. I wanted to throw down dunks on people to prove to them.
Could you dunk?
Absolutely. I was able to dunk till I was 45 years old.
Are you serious?
Oh, yeah. My son Reagan's 5'10". He can still throw down. 2 hands he can throw down dunks.
My respect for you keeps going up higher and higher. Gosh.
Well, let me tell you, I was playing basketball out of pride. I was playing basketball out of proving myself. And that's not what was honoring God.
Sure.
And so in that time, I believe God allowed me to go, are you going to be obedient to what I put in front of you? Or are you going to pursue this own selfish desire you have?
Yeah.
And do sports, whether it's part-time or even potentially the baseball thing. I mean, that could have maybe turned into something professional if I could keep hitting a curveball,
But you decided what?
Well, I remember being on my dorm room, on my knees, on my face, seeking the Lord and saying, God, what you want, not what I want. And I only had peace.
Wow.
About pursuing ministry full time and pursuing Marky full time.
Yeah, well,
so that's what I did.
The double whammy.
Double whammy.
So so give us a timeline from that point on, give us a little overview from that point on.
Well, Marky and I were married in 1994, and God had already been preparing her. So my story is not my story alone. We're one.
Yes.
And he had always told her, she always knew her whole life, she was going to be married to somebody in full-time ministry. So she knew years before I knew. And so she could, ask good questions and guide me in her delicate, wonderful Southern Belle way that I couldn't say no to. And we both finished school. She was a school teacher for a little while, and God threw open the doors, and I became a youth pastor. And quite honestly, we were happy with that. We worked in local churches for a number of years, not really having really desires beyond. I always loved missions. But every time I signed up for a short-term mission trip or something like that, it fell through for me every single time. And I love travel, and I love different cultures and organizations and missions things. Like, I was always aware. God just didn't open those doors for me for years, and I finally became just kind of like, okay, hey, some people get to go, and it's not me. Marky and I will pray and give, and other people get to be missionary. One of my best friends is a missionary full time and has lived in Africa for well over a decade, and so we were just very happy kind of being in youth ministry for a long time. And then
different states or
well, I grew up in the north, so we went back north. We were in Detroit for a while.
That's right, Detroit,
and Chicago for a while, and even Des Moines briefly, but at one point, not looking at all, God started making it clear He was going to bring us through some pretty significant changes, and that kind of freaked us out. But also, we were like, okay, God, Your will, not ours. And I tell you, Steve, God gave me a wonderful woman.
Yes.
And a wife.
Yes. Because
she's all about what God's leading us to do. And I'm not a big God said this and God said that kind of guy. But I did have a moment where I heard the Lord. And I don't know what the listener's theology is. And so if you're not open to this, sorry, too bad. But God talked to me.
Yeah.
And I'll skip that part of the story because it's really long. But I will say that ever so clearly, God said, move back to Arkansas. And I'll show you what's next.
Wow.
And so we did. We moved back to Rogers, Arkansas.
Without a role in place? Just
waiting for us.
Just like Abraham, just start moving and I'll tell you what to do when you get there type thing.
The only thing we had is Marky's grandma was living by herself and she had 3 bedrooms. And we had 3 kids. And she said we could
It must be the will of God.
But I'll tell you, within 2 weeks of moving back here, God had been preparing us to maybe be a part of a church plant situation. And I was laying no groundwork, but God was laying that groundwork. And within 2 weeks of moving back here, we were asked formally to be a part of helping plant a church.
Wow.
And God provided permanent housing within 2 weeks.
Wow. And
we were like, who but the Lord? And this is where the support raising thing kicks in, because the wonderful church that we had been associated with years before, which is Fellowship Bible Church of Northwest Arkansas. Robert Cupp had been a mentor and a friend back in the early 90s, and we'd lost touch to a certain degree, but here we were in the early 2000s, and they remembered me and I remembered them, and Marky and I showed up just to go to church and be spiritually fed and start building community, not really knowing what we were doing or how long we were going to do it. And within 2 weeks, Fellowship turned around and said, hey, it's not an accident God moved you back here. We're kind of looking for that pot stirrer, that person who's going to help lead a church plant. Would you be our directional leader? Would you be the basically the senior pastor for this new church we're planting called The Grove?
Wow.
And so that was an interesting time, because we weren't necessarily looking for that, but God had been preparing us for that. So, and I know Robert Cupp and some of those people pretty well.
Robert Cupp is actually on the board of directors of the parent organization of SRS. Support Raising Solutions is a resource ministry, one of them, for the parent organization, which is Center for Mission Mobilization, CMM. That website is just mobilization.org. But Dr. Robert Cupp is one of the board members there.
And so God just was like weaving these things that I'm not talented or gifted or smart enough to make happen. But God was allowing all this. But here was my curveball in all of this was when they asked me to be the directional long-term leader. They said, and this is a 7-year commitment.
7 years.
And we did not have that sense from the Lord. So we had a sense that we were supposed to be involved in church planting.
But when they said 7 years, that's a lot for this generation to handle.
Well, I'm Gen X, so give me a little credit.
Yeah, that's right.
But anyway, at the time, we went back and said, we're honored. Thank you so much for offering. And also, we just have a sense that God's leading us into something else in ministry long term. So the answer is yes and no. Yes, we want to help plant this church. No, I shouldn't say yes to being your long-term directional leader. That's not what I'm supposed to do. And fellowship came back and said, all right, well, we still want you in the mix. Also, we're not budgeted for whatever it is that you are.
Whatever it is you are.
We still want you. But tell you what, we're going to pay half your salary and you need to raise the other half.
Had you heard of personal support raising up to that point?
None.
You'd never had any contact with someone that had done that? No one had ever asked you? It was just, your background was totally, the pastor gets a salary from the church and the youth pastor gets a salary, and this was a totally foreign concept to you.
Completely. I was 31, maybe early 30s. I mean, I'd gotten those begging newsletters from missionaries, but no one had ever asked me.
Yeah.
No one had ever invited Marky and I to be a part. So yeah, my my understanding was pretty much zilch, and but I had confidence because one time back when I'd been a youth pastor, I'd written one letter to one parent asking for $5,000 for a project we were doing for the youth ministry, and he dropped off a check that day.
Said yes.
Off one email.
So you had at least one good experience.
I had one good experience.
That was a humdinger, wasn't it?
Well, my confidence was through the roof.
I'm 1 for 1.
My competence.
My average is $5,000 per gift.
My competence didn't exist. I mean, so we failed a lot for 3 years. We failed really bad.
What do you mean that? In other words, you took the challenge. We're going to go raise half our support.
Yes.
And and what was that experience like? Why do you say you failed a lot?
Well, let me say this: the church plant that didn't fail. God bless that.
Okay.
We were seeing lots of students from the University of Arkansas come to Christ and get discipled and leading others to Christ, and so from that standpoint, it was fantastic. But Marky and I really, and I really want to blame myself more than her, but we had no real good concept. I mean, Steve, I had a seminary degree, but we had no biblical concept of partnership in ministry.
They don't teach personal support raising from the scriptures at seminaries?
Not any seminary that I knew of at the time. Maybe some do now, but yeah, at the time, I had nothing. And so for 3 years, we scraped by.
So you attempted to raise your support,
but I just failed.
But it just didn't happen.
We raised a little bit, but I would run and do a surveillance for my dad's private investigation company now and then just to keep some food on the table. But I also was broken in that time. I will never forget. I'm still humbled.
What do you mean? What were you humbled or broken by?
I just remember Marky coming home with not enough groceries and me being upset at her. And
kind of blaming her somehow.
Yeah. I was like, we're hungry. We got to eat. And in her sweet way, she was just like, hey, baby, that's all the money there was.
Yeah.
And
that'll motivate you.
Man, I felt like a failure as a husband.
Yeah.
At that point, we had 4 kids.
Oh, my word.
And again, they all wanted to eat every day.
Yeah. It's amazing how they like to eat each day, isn't it?
And I started saying, there has to be a better way. There has to be a better way. And I don't blame Fellowship, but at the time, Fellowship Bible Church, they had no idea how to train me or release me. Like they didn't know what to tell anybody. And so I'm thankful for Fellowship. Fellowship's a ministry partner of me with Exago and in my role with SRS. And so I'm super thankful for them. But, at the end of those 3 years, God started leading us into starting a ministry called Exago Ministries. And the whole point of Exago is equipping ministry leaders to survive and thrive. And I went, oh, wait a minute. Now I am going to be 100% dependent on support. And I failed at getting 50%. I better get some help. And so I Googled support raising training.
That's what you just typed into the search engine.
And I found out about this crazy guy named Steve Shadrach.
Yeah.
And I had no idea you lived 20 minutes from me. I had no clue whatsoever. And I think this is before the search engines were optimized for local searches and stuff like that. And so I could have got something from Canada or from anywhere else in the world. And it suggested this is back when you were bodybuilders. It had the bodybuilders.
I was in a little better shape back then, you know.
Well, that's what you called it. And so I signed up for and attended a boot camp in 2006 at Mount Sequoia in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Going, okay, God, I don't want to say that this is the Hail Mary, but boy, this better work, or maybe we won't be able to start.
So let me see if I understand. You worked for this church for several years. They encouraged you to raise half your support, but you attempted some things that just didn't work out. There was failure there.
For 3 years, yes.
You felt led to launch out and start a whole new ministry, but realizing you were going to if you did this, you were going to have to raise your full support.
Yeah.
And was your wife in support of you launching it? She had seen the lack of funds that came in here.
Right.
Was she supportive of you launching out? Now you're going to be 100% supported?
Perhaps her faith is bigger than mine, Steve, because, Marky has always been the type that, and not in a silly way.
Sure.
But in a God-honoring way.
Not in a flippant way,
yeah. Your God is my God, your people are my people. We're in this together. And she every bit felt just as much as I did that God was leading us towards Exago. But also I remember her saying, boy, you better figure this out. The support.
You better get a hitch in your get along, boy.
Yeah, she's like, our car's getting old, our housing situation.
So she was a realist also.
She was. And so, and then the other curveball within all this, our silent passenger that you know about, and I've shared it in other podcasts, is we found out she had a brain tumor.
Yeah. So there were tremendous physical issues along the way as well.
Through the eyes of man, everything we did back in 2005, 2006, when we started that transition and started Exago, it was crazy. It was foolish.
Yeah.
It was stupid in the eyes of man.
But
God was leading us.
Yeah, I don't know if I would have encouraged you to do this or not.
I wouldn't tell anybody else to do it.
Let's take a few seconds to mention an important resource that can be helpful for support raisers. CMM Press has published another great book that is not only for those who raise their personal support, but also they oversee teams or even an organization whose staff teams raises their own personal support. Scott Morton is a champion for biblically based ministry partnership development, so I highly recommend that you pick up a copy of his book called Blind Spots. It's available at cmmpress.org, where you can receive a 10% discount if you use the code SRS Podcast.
Okay, so you did the preparation for the boot camp.
100% of it.
You showed up.
I read all the scriptures.
And you're sitting in a big U. Mm-hmm. Back then we'd have the big horseshoe with how many, 30, 40 others or 50 others?
It was, 30 or 40 people. Yeah.
And so you're one of the boot campers.
Yep.
And what was that 2-day experience like for you?
Well, have you ever seen the Charlie Brown cartoon where the teachers wah, 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 wah? Steve, I love you desperately. You're a mentor and a friend.
But
anybody's voice over 2 days.
Oh, I know, yeah.
It just starts like you just stop listening.
Yeah.
And so I loved it.
But it was just...
It was too much for my brain.
Yep.
It was like you need to go to the drinking fountain and you get the fire hydrant.
Yeah.
And so your mouth gets wet and you get a drink, but also you're like, man, what is everything I missed? And so it was a blessing, but also
felt overwhelming to you.
Yeah, it left.
So you came back and what? What did you do with it? You got the training, and then what did you do with it at that point?
Well, I applied it as best I could for a while, and then I kind of lost my way. I didn't have a coach.
What was the amount you were trying to raise, for instance? After the boot camp, you were going to say 100% figure would be what?
Boy, this is, I don't know. I'm going to guess that it was $4,000
$4,000 a month.
Again, this was 2005, 2006.
Okay. And so you went out and you had some appointments.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, and I did achieve some early success.
But you didn't get to 100%.
No, I didn't. I didn't. And I was one of those people that, like, I worked really hard, but also I didn't personally know anybody else who raised support.
Yeah.
So I had nobody to ask. I knew anyone else who was fully funded. And I certainly didn't want to ask questions from people that were also not doing it well.
Yeah.
And I was too cheap to go through the boot camp a second time, which I really should have done. That would have been a wise investment.
So what happened? I mean, how did you support yourself and your ministry if you hadn't raised your support?
Well, I'm trying to think back. There was a few years there where I didn't stop raising support, but I also wasn't really fully focused on it. I was nibbling around the edges.
Yeah.
And then also, I would go and do a insurance fraud investigation. And
so you had some little extra income.
Yeah, doing a little
things
tent
on the side.
making, doing a
Okay.
little tent
And that
making.
you survived.
And we survived, but at one point, I think God just really allowed me to be miserable with that. And here's what it felt like. It felt like I am taking care of my family, but I'm not being obedient to what God's put in front of me.
Interesting.
And I was doing ministry. Exago was starting to build. We were growing in influence and an ability to minister to church planters and missionaries and youth workers. Like, God was allowing some influence, but also it was like, boy, it just feels like we're just getting the taste of it. We're not actually getting it. And at some point, some conviction really kicked in. And I realized, boy, if I'm ever going to get this done, I got to have a lot of appointments.
Yeah.
I got to start clearing my schedule. I can't go do 3-4 day surveillances. Like, I need to raise support 6 days a week and take a day off, and then raise support 6 more days.
Which is what we trained you in the boot camp.
Well, I didn't remember that. You probably said that and 1,000 other great things.
Yeah, but
right?
it was overkill on 18 hours. Your brain gets fried. I know. Yeah,
it was too much. But anyway, so at that point, so it took me a few years, but yeah, I did. I can confidently say by God's grace, I did get to the point where I was spiritually healthy, vision driven, and fully funded. And then, as that reached, I kind of reached that level, so to speak, and Marky and I, and we're sitting here, you can see my house from here. I certainly don't live in a mansion.
No,
we don't live in a shack.
Well, I think, is it 9 bedrooms or 10 bedrooms?
No, by no means. But God has blessed us. But, we reached a point where we said, okay, so now what's next? And once we were fully funded, and I tell you, Steve, you talk about this. I've heard you say it before, but my ability to pursue the vision of equipping ministry leaders to survive and thrive was suddenly unencumbered.
Wow.
I didn't have to run out and go, well, I'm going to go minister to this ministry leader, and then I'm going to go raise support. I'm going to go minister to this ministry leader, and now
you were free to totally obey.
Yes.
And fulfill the calling that God has. There was a tremendous freedom there, wasn't there?
Absolutely.
The chains were off.
And the momentum in ministry.
Instead of being crippled, you were running full speed now.
Full speed ahead.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
It was so good. And then all of a sudden, other ministry leaders started going, wait a minute, what are you doing?
They saw that you were at full support.
Yeah. And they would say things
impressed.
like, hey, I know you're not rich, but you never seem to have money problems.
Like the rest of us do.
Yeah, like the rest of us, we couldn't afford to, we'd be at a conference and
There's poor talk going on.
Oh, so much poor talk, and everybody's taking Greyhounds to get to the conference, and I'm the one who flew to California instead of trying to drive
Got the rental car instead of hitchhiked or something.
Yeah. Or the rental car wasn't just this horrible lemon thing that, it didn't have room for my luggage, but actually I was picking up the other people at the airport, right? And so, so at one point, I started getting support raising questions a lot.
Wow.
And that was not my focus. My focus was equipping ministry leaders to survive and thrive. I didn't see the connection at first. I did eventually, but that honestly was because of you. And so, you fast forward a number of years, and all of a sudden, it's 2013 and 2012, 2013.
And
well, first of all, for 2012, I couldn't sit down with you. I couldn't get a hold of you. I mean, you are the Steve Shadrach.
Yeah, I hide out in my basement, So, so when we met, I remember the day we met, and what was your reasoning for coming to see me? I refreshed my memory. I think I could say, but I want to hear from you.
Well, in my mind, I had two issues. Personally, I had an issue of I was having a hard time differentiating personal and organizational support.
Yeah.
Which that's really not that hard of a thing, but for me at that time, in that moment, it was, because God was blessing and there were good things happening, and I was like, well, where does one stop and the other start?
I got you.
And so that was like the personal questions I had. But really, probably the bigger question was, I was getting so many support raising related coaching questions that I had started coaching.
Mainly from youth workers around the country.
Mainly from youth workers. They were asking me to coach them in their support raising.
And you felt inadequate.
I was very concerned I was giving bad advice. I was really concerned that I'm like pretending I'm Steve Shadrach. I am not Steve Shadrach. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. And so I honestly, I was sitting down with you partially just for affirmation, confirmation, or exhortation to do it differently.
Am I telling these guys the right thing?
Yeah.
Kind of thing,
Because, if my passion was for equipping ministry leaders to survive and thrive, the last thing I want to do is cause them to stumble.
Of course.
And I was starting to realize, I didn't have the words yet. I was starting to realize, hey, this person's lack of funding is what's keeping them from being.
It's a biggie.
That was huge.
It's a biggie, yeah.
And so that's really why we sat down in 2013, and then that just led to more and more conversations.
Where did we go from there? I know we don't have all day for our podcast. I'm not exactly sure where how much time we have, because this is the first time for me ever host of the podcast.
Well,
you've done it 100 times and I've done it once.
I think you're a better host than I am.
No. But where did it go from there?
Well,
we had our initial meeting. I can picture where you were sitting and the conversation we had. But how did it unfold from that point in your mind?
Well, first of all, that was a 15-minute meeting, and you were gracious enough to give me another 15 minutes about a month later. So that was
Gosh,
good.
I feel like a terrible person all of a sudden.
Well, you were very busy.
Well, I normally don't see people in 15-minute increments.
Hey, you know what?
It's like my attorney, he charges you every 6 minutes. His little hand is going like this every 6 minutes.
Right. Well, what happened is, I think after that second 15-minute meeting, and I don't know what you remember, but something shifted in your countenance and how you were talking to me, and all of a sudden I wasn't the interviewer, I was the interviewee, and you started digging in on me, asking a lot more questions, and then you said, can I take you to lunch? I want to get to know you a little bit more. And so somewhere in all of that, I do remember some semblance of a conversation where you kind of surprised me and said, Aaron, I think you actually understand this better than you think you do. And that was both greatly I was thankful and didn't really quite feel worthy.
But affirmed.
Yeah, I was affirmed.
That maybe I am on the right track.
Yeah, I felt like I was on the right track, but I also was becoming painfully aware of how much I didn't know. And so that's kind of how we started spending time. And then not too many months later, at one point, you invited, I had 7 different national ministry leaders coming in from all over the United States to go to a boot camp that happened to be held in Northwest Arkansas.
I remember it.
And you said, hey, would you be willing to maybe teach a few sessions?
Ooh.
I thought you were throwing me a bone because I had leaders coming in and you were just trying to honor me for the work I was putting together and maybe having people come to the boot camp. But I realized later you had some ulterior motives.
Well, I probably also wanted I realized this particular group of people in this boot camp, they were there because you'd invited them, but they were also there because they had observed someone in our ranks has gotten the full support. Mm-hmm. And your credibility had grown among them, I could tell. And so not only was I wanting to train other boot camp facilitators, of which you have become, to me, the par excellence. You and Mike are like the cream of the crop there. But I'm just saying that, so yes, I wanted to start training you and preparing you for that. But also, I think you had something to say to the whole group, for sure, but certainly to those staffers that were there that day. I remember that boot camp.
Well, I love my wife desperately. And I'm just thankful I got 26 years with her so far. And, the time we're recording this, she has to have another major surgery within a week. Like, she is a fighter.
Yes.
But also, I have 4 kids. And I think what you saw is somebody just kind of working it out and not pretending they have it all together.
Sure.
But someone who is working it out and trying to walk the walk and talk the talk and model it. But I do recall you saying after I taught a few sessions, and you'd said something very encouraging about, where in the world did you learn to do this? How did you do this so well? You said something like that. And to me, it was like, well, obviously it makes sense. Like, my passion is equipping ministry leaders to survive and thrive. You just put me in front of a bunch of people who their biggest felt need is raising support. I was like, it was like chocolate and peanut butter, Reese's peanut butter cup. And that is something I learned from you in our conversations where, and I think I mentioned this in a different podcast recently, where I remember where we were driving on College in Fayetteville when you said, Aaron, if you really want to equip these ministry leaders to survive and thrive, you just need to know their number one felt need is their finances. They don't want to talk about it. They might not want to admit it, but oh boy, do they feel it.
Yeah.
And so you were, Steve, you were really instrumental in helping me kind of put that chocolate and peanut butter together and go, oh, it's not a distraction to talk about support raising. It actually might be one of the things I can do well to most equip many ministry leaders to survive and thrive in ministry.
Well, I remember how effective you were, and you are, of course, but I remember how impressed I was with the way you knew the material, the way you related to people as a group, small group, individually, the way you responded to questions, your sense of humor, your likability, your relatability, your approachability. I mean, all those things, it was obvious that God had gifted you. And you're right, I was asking the Lord to start giving us not more trainers or speakers, but facilitators. And we had just transitioned, had we not, the materials from a 2-day, 18-hour Shadrach-only lecture seminar where we just dump truck it on people. And we had spent a year creating this whole new curriculum. Well, now it was a 2-day facilitated workshop, and they're sitting around tables, and it's full of Q&A and role playing, and it's just lots of adult learning methodology that makes it a very enjoyable 2 days, invigorating 2 days.
And let's give credit
instead of just
that was you, that was John Patton, that was I think Tim Howington was
Dave Flynn.
Micah May, Dave Flynn for sure.
Dave Flynn was the biggie.
Dave Flynn a lot. Kayla Murdoch,
of course.
There were some people that really.
Yes.
Wait, Kayla Murdoch, is that her? That's the married name, right?
I don't remember.
Was that the
Sweet Kayla?
Oh, I love Kayla, and I know her. We email sometimes. I'm forgetting her last name. Anyway, point being, I wanted to throw out. It wasn't just Steve. It wasn't just Aaron. There's a lot of really big contributing people.
SRS had ridden this old horse that's sitting here right now for 14 straight years every month and I was burned out. I was really burned out, and so I was asking God to give us a few younger facilitators that could step into this whole new workshop format and curriculum that we had created.
Yeah.
And give me enough time, enough energy to hang in there long enough to find the right individuals, to give them enough training and exposure and transition to where they could really get in the saddle and run with this thing. And bro, God has raised you up, and you made some amazing decisions to set aside some other ministry responsibilities and transition those to others in order to give the majority of your time to training these workers around the U.S. and now beyond. And I'm not saying it's the only thing that you do that Exago does, but they have seconded you on a good chunk of your monthly time now. Yeah. And you and a man named Micah May, a leader with FCA, have been the two main leaders and facilitators now for 6 years, 7 years?
Yeah, over 6 years.
Every single month going to a different city around the country and now going to other countries. Yeah. Yeah. And Micah, are you feeling burned out? Are you feeling invigorated? I love it. Are you seeing the power and potential in this? Do you feel like that God is maximizing the gifts and potential that you have?
Steve, I've always said I want to beat your 14-year record, so I'm
brother. Okay.
So I'm doing.
You're almost there. You're halfway there.
I'm thankful for Micah. He's fantastic. I love him. Not just because he also taught me spearfishing, but he's a great guy. We've become so close, good friends. And he's able to be at those boot camps 70-80% of the time. But Micah also does them within FCA. What a godly man.
Yeah.
That trains so many
He's their
leaders.
in-house trainer.
Yeah.
Along with serving the body of Christ on, 9 or 10 months a year.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And when he doesn't do it, now God has been awesome to raise up Jeremy Henderson of Go-To Nations, and he'll do 2 or 3 boot camps with SRS every year.
Yeah.
So we're, I tell you, I'm so blessed. I get to hang out with some really godly, awesome leaders.
Well, tie this time up for us. Tie this episode up for us as to where do you feel like the Lord has you now and heading, and how does it relate to reaching the world for Christ and raising up laborers and getting them trained to raise their support and launch their ministries? I mean, tie it up by giving a big picture for us. It's not just, I lead a 2-day seminar each month.
Well, okay, all right. So I'll say this. I'm pretty intentional about not talking about Exago very much on SRS's platform. That just makes sense. It's wise to do that. Like, SRS's platform is really important in and of itself, and so I don't bring up Exago all the time. But I am thankful for my board of directors and my supporters. I still work for Exago. As far as the IRS is concerned, I've only worked for Exago for 15 plus years now.
It's its own separate 501c3 with its own board of directors. Yep. And they have given their blessings to, in a sense, second, but in a sense, allow you to spend a lot of your time being the training director for SRS.
Yeah. Okay. And so I love that. I think it's a healthy partnership. We actually just we have what's called an MOU, a memorandum of understanding. A new one just got finalized, and it's a really healthy partnership. But also, what
did they give you that new SUV that you demanded?
Man, well, actually, I'm more on the red M&Ms only kind of.
Oh, okay,
rider.
in the green room.
Yeah, in the green room. But my passion continues to be equipping ministry leaders to survive and thrive. That hasn't changed. And Exago does some holistic coaching. It's similar to member care. And still trying to grow that. In fact, I'm coaching a guy right now. Every month we spend time together, and in between, I still love that. I love that personal side of things.
Yes.
Exago does some support raising coaching, although I have to say, we really don't want to support raise coach. We call it MPD coaching. We don't want to do that with people who haven't been through a support raising solutions boot camp.
Yeah.
We want to walk with people with 12 plus weeks as they're raising support, but we're not interested in doing that with people who don't take the time to do the study and to go through the boot camp. We want to build off the wonderful platform that you started with Support Raising Solutions. We're not trying to build a competitor, so to speak. Sure. And so those are 2 areas that I'm still very passionate about and I want to see help grow. But much like you, as a wonderful mentor and model, I want to empower others to do these things.
Good.
I don't want to just be the one doing them. And so, we certainly have people that are doing coaching within Exago that are not me. And I think that's our future with Exago. But also, I love being the global training director for SRS. I love training leaders, whether it's online, in person, in the U.S., or going to close countries.
And is there an international flavor or goals of taking it to other countries, other languages?
As much as I can personally, but I know that's not a vision in and of itself. So I know
does SRS want to take it?
Absolutely. We are training, even right now, we're working with leaders that are learning to facilitate boot camps on a global scale. We have multiple languages. In fact, I just heard about another version of the God Ask.
Was it?
That was another language.
I noticed. Well, no, was it Russian? They just I just noticed. I can speak a little Russian. Choo-choo. I can impress our listeners with my Paruski. I lived in Ukraine for a year. But no, that's exciting that now we're trying to raise up workers and get them fully funded, launched, really from all over the world.
Well, and SRS, one of the reasons I just love working with SRS is it's like this third-party autonomous organization that's all about the Great Commission. Like we're just trying, like whatever your vision is for ministry, great, go for it. Let us help get you there. But that's it. We're not trying to take you over.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And so like Mark Wilson, he for a while you guys had me being the managing director of SRS, and that went okay. And the network, it exploded. Like a lot of stuff went really, really well, but also we reached a point where it went beyond my managing capabilities.
Well, we also saw what your specific skills really were. We wanted you to operate in your sweet spot.
Yeah, and so I'm so thankful for Mark Wilson and Callie Buchholz and the rest of the SRS team that's come in. And they're really expanding SRS. And so I'm thrilled I want to remain a facilitator and a trainer. I want to train trainers. I want to lead leaders.
Yeah.
That's what I really love to do. I like building relationships and pouring into those people.
Yeah.
Don't put me in an HR. Don't put me in an HR role.
Well, I think we have a boot
translation.
camp coming up in Paris, and one in Rome, and one in Hawaii. And,
Sign me up. Hawaii. I know for sure we don't. Don't be lying about that.
Don't be lying about that.
But we have done some. In hard to reach places.
Oh yeah.
Where it's illegal to talk about the gospel.
Yes.
And I've been able to physically go to some pretty amazing places and help facilitate boot camps. And again, go back earlier in our conversation. I was the guy that didn't think I ever was going to be able to do missions.
Isn't that amazing?
And then I find myself in an underground church.
Isn't that wild?
I'm so blessed.
Well, we want to tie things up today, Aaron. This has been fantastic to hear your life story, how you came to Christ, how you grew in Christ, some about your calling that the Lord put on your life, your meeting Marky and marrying an amazing woman that has been your life partner, and your 4 kids, and this journey of ministry and the churches that God has used you in, and then the starting of this Exago and impacting youth workers around the country at one time, and then seeing the need to get to your own support and get fully funded yourself.
Yeah.
And then realizing it's such a huge felt need and real need, of course, for Christian workers all over the U.S. and now all over the world. If you're listening to this podcast now, and you have workers in other countries, contact our office. Let's start talking about how we could put together a boot camp somewhere in Africa, somewhere in Latin America, somewhere in Asia, somewhere in Europe.
We would love to get somebody to do it, or I'd like to come do it for you, because it's not about my passport. It's about how can we equip more ministry leaders to be spiritually healthy, vision-driven, and fully funded.
Well, and we're looking for really hosts of those boot camps. You don't have to necessarily go, we've got 40 people, in Brazil that we could put a boot camp, but there are so many ministries that have staff in different countries around the planet here that if we can provide, and maybe you could help host one of these, if you're listening, your ministry in a particular part of the world. Well, it'd be some of your staff, but then there could be others that fill in that to make it a full boot camp. From other ministries, either from even neighboring countries, and there is value, there is impact in letting people from different ministries have boot camps together and rub shoulders with one another. There's a real sharpening effect that takes place there. I've seen it over and over again. Is it okay to have an in-house boot camp with just your staff and just your people? Yes, there's value to that. There's pros to that, but they do not get to rub shoulders with people from other ministries, other states, other countries, other walks of life, other ages. That really is a tremendously sharpening experience for them. So anyway, Aaron, thank you, brother. This has been fantastic. You've been listening to the Support Raising Solutions podcast. Aaron Babyar is your normal host. He's been doing this, for a long time, well over 100 episodes. And so this is my first time, but it was an honor to get to do this and to really interview you as our host, and for our listeners to really understand your story.
Well, let me give a final shout out.
It's been an amazing story.
Well, thank you. Part of my story is you, Steve. So thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. I'm thankful for you and Carol Shadrach. She's a big part of this. Of course, Marky is a part of this. John Reagan.
Behind every successful man is a woman who couldn't be more surprised.
That's true. That's true. And I'm thankful for my 4 kids. You and I have both raised kids. John Reagan, Macy Payton, and my kids have grown up as missionary kids, even though we live in the U.S. and they've seen this and they've witnessed this.
Yes.
And I'm thankful for you and for my family and for your family. And
Thank you.
It's thanks for suggesting this. It's been weird but kind of fun to be the interviewed this time.
Well, I think our listeners have been listening to you and enjoying you, learning from you, and it's fun for them now to have some context of your life and your background, and the mouth speaks from that which fills the heart, and that they got a little better feel for your heart. So thank you for taking the time to share your life with us today. And so that's what we're going to wrap it up now. This has been a great session, and we're honored to have you, and we will see you next time on the Support Raising Solutions podcast.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your ideas for future content. Please visit supportraisingsolutions.org/feedback to share your thoughts and questions. Also, wherever you download your podcast from, be sure to subscribe for future episodes and come back each week to gain more insight into the process of building and maintaining your personal support team.